Well, we're going to be continuing our series that we started a few weeks ago called Hope Now. And I think if there's ever a time where we needed hope, it was now. And especially in what we're dealing with and what's going on in our world as we just prayed about. But last week we looked at two fears that Jesus came to confront in our lives. And today we're going to actually look at two more fears that Jesus comes to confront in our lives as well. The fear of uncleanness and the fear of hopelessness. See, the Jews were a people who are overly concerned with this idea of uncleanness. They wanted to make sure everybody was fully clean, pure before God, followed all the right laws, rituals, ceremonial washings, all those kind of things. They wanted to make sure everybody was good. And they thought the cleaner they were on the outside, the more godly they were on the inside. But the religious leaders harped and preached cleanliness. They had so many laws in place that it was almost impossible to be clean because the laws demanded perfection. The religious leaders oppressed people with their laws and regulations. The people exhausted themselves trying to keep up because that was how you got close to God. That's how you knew that God approved you if you followed these laws to a T. But another thing the Jewish people were dealing with in the first century was the fear of hopelessness. I think they held on to some hope, but I think over time they were losing sight of that. They were losing that hope that a Messiah would come. I think you see that in the story of Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist. When the angel appeared to him and said, you and your wife are going to have a son, and he just didn't believe him. He's just like, we're old. It's literally impossible. It's physically impossible. There's no way that we can have a child. Because I think Zechariah had given up on any kind of hope that a Messiah was going to come. And even when Jesus showed up, there were some who didn't believe him. They're like, there's no way you could be the Messiah. You're a carpenter's son. You're not a rabbi. You didn't go to the rabbinical schools. You're not a Pharisee. These fears are still very prominent today. These fears still control people today. People are afraid of becoming tainted or unclean by the world or the mistakes they have made. Even the church doesn't want to be unclean. We tend to shy away from people who we may consider unclean. As we were just praying, we look at people we may think they're inferior to us, therefore stay away from us. One of my fears right now, maybe not fears may be too strong a word, but concerns is, how is this whole social distancing thing going to affect us as human beings? And especially affect us as the church? Because we may be hesitant to reach out to our neighbor. Even when the government and even when the health organizations, the CDC, all those people, all those experts say, it's okay to be near people again, I'm worried that we may not want to be around them. People, we put our hope in things, but we put our hope in things of this world too much. During this crisis, when people are hoping for a vaccine, some kind of medicine that will cure us, that will stop this. But what happens if a vaccine is never developed? What happens if a medicine or a cure is never developed? What happens if it never materializes? Where does our hope go then? The stories we'll look at today deal with these two fears and show how Jesus confronted each one. And I hope that we can find some hope in how Jesus confronts those, because he still does it today. We do not believe in a God who is dead. We believe in a God who is very much alive and still confronts these things even today. So the first thing we're going to look at is this fear of uncleanness. And we're going to be in Mark chapter 5, 21 through 34. And this is kind of where we left off last week, with a couple of stories that we looked at last week of Jesus encountering some people. And so in Mark chapter 5, Jesus is going to be urged and begged to go to heal a man's son. Or heal a man's daughter, I should say. So Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 34, this is what it says. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. Once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him, he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be free from your suffering." This is an interesting story because there's a whole crowd around Jesus as he's making his way to Jairus' house, because Jairus' daughter is sick, and Jairus has come and begged him, "Please come and heal my daughter." So he's going there, and the crowd is following him, and the crowd is just reaching for him. He's the celebrity. People are reaching for him and grabbing at him, all these kind of things. And then he knows somebody touched him, and he turns around and says, "Who touched me?" And his disciples are like, "What are you talking about? Everybody's touching you." "What do you mean?" Here's the thing about this woman. She had been bleeding for 12 years. She had spent probably all the money she had on doctors to find some kind of cure, but none of them could help her. And the thing about this woman, so we have found it hard to be away from church for 2 months, right? She couldn't go to her church for 12 years. If you were a woman who was bleeding, that meant you were unclean. If you were unclean, there was a ritual, there was a law that said you had to go through a cleansing in order to go back to the temple or even the synagogue. She could never do it because the bleeding never stopped. In Leviticus chapter 15, 25 through 30, I'll read the actual law to you so that you know I'm not just making it up. But Leviticus chapter 15, 25 through 30, it says this. Again, this is the law of Moses. When a woman has a discharge of blood for many days at a time other than her monthly period, or has a discharge that continues beyond her period, she will be unclean as long as she has the discharge, just as in the days of her period. Any bed she lies on while her discharge continues will be unclean, as is her bed during her monthly period, and anything she eats on will be unclean, as during her period. Anyone who touches them will be unclean. They must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening. When she is cleansed from her discharge, she must count off 7 days, and after that she will be ceremonially clean. On the 8th day she must take 2 doves or 2 young pigeons and bring them to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting. The priest is to sacrifice one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. In this way, he will make atonement for her before the Lord for the uncleanness of her discharge. She could never do this because it never stopped. 12 years. And anyone she was around, anyone she touched, would be ceremonially unclean as well, and they would have to go through the ritual to be clean again so that they could go to the temple or the synagogue. So for this woman to be in this crowd, she is taking a gigantic risk. If anyone finds her there could be severe punishments for her because she is willfully in the crowd as an unclean person. This woman was desperate. And in her desperation, she reached out to the one who could heal her. But here's the question. If she touched Jesus, wouldn't that make him unclean? Because, like I said earlier, the Jews had this fear of things being unclean. And because of that fear, they forgot the power behind the law, which was love. Jesus loved people. And he cannot be corrupted by our human uncleanness. He overcomes it. We cannot let the current situation in our world today change the way we live out the gospel. We can't be afraid to approach people when it is safe again. I'm not saying go hug everybody right now. But we can't be afraid when it's deemed safe again. We can't be afraid to approach people. People still need to experience the saving power of Christ found in the gospel. People need to be brought near to Jesus, and may Jesus use us to do so. See, this woman, she reached out in faith because she believed Jesus could heal her. Because honestly, what else did she have to lose? She had spent money on doctors who could do nothing for her. She couldn't go to the religious leaders, to the temple, to the synagogue to meet with God because she wasn't allowed to. So this was her only shot. She had heard about Jesus, and just maybe she held on to some kind of hope that maybe Jesus could cleanse her. People fear uncleanness. Uncleanness doesn't just have to do with being dirty. So uncleanness has to do with sinfulness too. Think about it this way. What if a man started attending our church? After a while, we learned that he was an accomplice to murder years ago. Would we allow him to continue to attend our church? I mean, this guy is an accomplice to murder. Let's say he was never found guilty of it. Maybe he never went to prison for it. Would we still allow him to attend this church if he wanted to? Or she. You know, women, I guess, can kill people too. It's happened. Would we let him serve? Would we let him teach Sunday school? Would I let him stand up right here where I am and share the gospel with people? Well, this scenario has actually happened. There's a guy named Saul in the first century who was an accomplice to murder. He watched Stephen being stoned to death. But then he encountered Jesus. And he started preaching the gospel. And the early church, at first, wanted to keep him at his arm's length. No, we can't. I don't know about this. This guy's trying to infiltrate. This guy's trying to come in and do something bad here. We've heard about this guy. He kills people. He arrests followers of Jesus. But then the guy named Barnabas said, no, I've been with him. I've heard him preach. This guy's changed. We fear we will somehow be tainted by someone else's uncleanness. We fear that they will corrupt us, our families, or our churches. We don't want unclean people to walk in our doors, even though we say we do. We want to keep them in arm's length. A couple weeks ago, another pastor took his own life. His name is Darren Patrick. He was fairly well known. He was actually a chaplain, baseball chaplain for the St. Louis Cardinals. And there was a time in his life where he fell from grace. He committed a sin that caused his name to be tarnished. He admitted to it, confessed it, repented of it. Through that fall, he was restored by Jesus and began to tell the story of how Jesus changed him and restored him. But yet the guilt and the shame of his past mistakes, well, it was too much for him to overcome. And I was reading about him when this happened, and he said he told a friend recently that he hated the fact that if you Googled his name, his past sins would be the only thing that would come up. Not how Jesus changed him, not how Jesus restored him, but how his sin had tainted him. The sad part of this tear-down society is that the church doesn't seem to be immune to it. We love to tear people down. We love to tear our own down. I've been guilty of it. I have torn people down. It's wrong. We push people away that we deem unclean because we think we are superior to you because we see things differently than you. Just go back to this woman that Jesus encountered. She was isolated and alone. She had nothing. There's nothing mentioned of her husband, no kids mentioned. It's just her. She was considered unclean, and no one probably approached her because the church of their day would consider her unclean if you did, or consider you unclean if you did approach her. But the God of the universe, who is pure and holy above all of us, He didn't stand at a distance when He knew someone touched her. Did you catch that in Pastor Red? He didn't stand there at a distance and go, all right, who touched me? Who did that? Did you do it? Did you do it? He didn't start pointing fingers. He said, who touched me? And it said he looked in the crowd until he found her. And then he went to her. And she fell at his feet. She fell at his feet just overcome with fear because she's like, oh no, he's going to punish me, because that's how the religious leaders were. She thought Jesus would be like one of those religious leaders and punish her for touching him. And he said, your faith has made you well. Imagine that life-changing moment. He didn't rebuke her. He loved her. He wanted her to be saved. He wanted her to experience the power of the gospel. There are people who think there are also people who think their uncleanness will rub off on others. We think their uncleanness will rub off on us, and they think the same thing, but their uncleanness will rub off on us too. They're afraid that they are too unclean to come close to Jesus or even to step foot in a church. And I think part of that is because maybe the church has put ourselves on a pedestal and we look down on people. Maybe we've acted more like the Pharisees than Jesus at times. But see, the thing is, Jesus meets us where we are, not where we should be. Jesus has never met somebody where they should be. He's always met somebody where they are. Even when Peter encountered Jesus, and the miracle of the fish, when the fish are just overflowing the boats, and Peter falls at the feet of Jesus and he goes, get away from me, Lord, I am an unclean man. Like Peter was overcome because Peter, in his eyes, Jesus was like the religious leaders he had grown up with. They were so far above him. They're like, Lord, just get away from me. I'm a sinful man, get away from me. And what did Jesus say to him? He said, you come follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. Was Peter at the point where he could be a fisher of men? Nope. Not really even close. But Jesus didn't meet Peter where Peter should be. He met Peter where he was. See, the gospel tells us that God sees us and still loves us. The gospel reminds us that Jesus took our uncleanness upon himself so that we could be made clean. The gospel reminds us that uncleanness is not something to be afraid of, because nothing can make Jesus unclean. He takes uncleanness and washes it away with his blood. That's what the cross is all about. It's like, come to the cross and you'll find cleanness. You'll find salvation. You'll find restoration. You'll be made new. You get the best do-over you could ever get. And it's a do-over that's not a one-time thing. It's a do-over for the rest of your life. Do we follow in the footsteps of Jesus like this? Do we allow ourselves to be unclean in order to love people like Jesus did? Jesus was willing to be seen as unclean in the eyes of the religious leaders, to love that woman and to love anybody he encountered. He didn't care, because he wanted the religious leaders to understand, you guys missed the whole point of the law. The whole point of the law was not to put so much pressure on people and not to demand perfection from people. It was the whole point of the law was to point to the one who would do it for you. The whole point of the law was to point to Jesus. The whole point of the law was like, here's your guidelines to get ready to encounter the Messiah, the one who could fulfill the law. Jesus' love for people drove him to love the unclean. Does it drive us? Does the love of Jesus that we have encountered, does it drive us to love the unclean? I hope so. The next fear that Jesus confronts, after he encounters this woman, he makes his way to Jairus' house. And he encounters the fear of hopelessness. In Mark 5:35-42, This is what it says. Mark chapter 5, 35 through 42. Picking up where we left off. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, don't be afraid. Just believe. He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? This child is not dead, but asleep. But they laughed at him. Imagine laughing at God. That's what they did. They laughed at God. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with them and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. I really like ancient languages sometimes. Man, they can say a whole lot just in a very few words, right? We need to practice that in English. Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. Notice what the people said to Jairus. They told him not to bother the teacher anymore. The Greek used here is very strong. It meant not to weary or vex. The people at Jairus' house had lost hope. And they're just like, hey, Jairus, she's done. Move on with your life. There's no hope now. Because the people telling them this didn't know who Jairus was walking with. They didn't know who Jesus was. Maybe they thought he was a prophet, maybe they thought he was a good teacher, a good rabbi, but they didn't realize that he was the Son of God himself. But notice what Jesus says to Jairus. There's a stark contrast here. The people from Jairus' house come to Jairus, give up hope, Jairus, she's dead. Jesus says, don't be afraid, just believe. See, Jairus was overcome by this hopelessness. So were the people from his house overcome by hopelessness. And Jesus was not. Jesus confronted that fear of hopelessness and said, don't be afraid. We allow the past and the present to determine our hope. People allow the past to continue to beat them down. That's what I struggle with. We allow the present to shake our faith in a better tomorrow. And let's not even talk about the future. We should let the past and the present determine our hope. The past, Jesus died and rose again. The present, we live the resurrected life because of Jesus by the power of the Holy Spirit. And we should also have the future, Jesus is coming again. 2 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4. Just so again, you don't take my words for it. Here's what Paul says. For to be sure, here's the past. He was crucified in weakness, yet he lives by God's power. Likewise, we are weak in him, yet by God's power we will live with him and are dealing with you. So Paul says, let the past determine your hope. Jesus was crucified and rose again. That's the past. That happened. It's fact. Let that determine your hope. And then if you look at 1 Thessalonians 4:14, again, this is Paul writing to the Thessalonian church. He says this. For we believe that Jesus died, past, and rose again, past. And so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. That God will bring. It will happen that Jesus will come back. There's the future. And then Revelation chapter 21, 5 through 7. This is John, the Apostle John's revelation that he saw. That was revealed to him. He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. You notice that part? Write these words down, for they are trustworthy and true. Write them down. When you write something down, that's binding. It's like, yeah, write it down. We'll show it to be true. There's been a lot of things written down that have shown to be not true. But these words have been written down, and they were written down 2,000 years ago, and they're going to be proven true, that Jesus will return. He said to me, verse 6, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children." Let the past determine your hope. Jesus Christ crucified and risen again. Live in that present. Live in the present with that truth. That Jesus Christ died for us and rose again for us so we can have a new life, to live this life for Him. And let the future determine that hope too, because in the future, one day, today, tomorrow, 2,000 years from now, who knows? Let that future determine our hope too, that Jesus Christ is coming again. Because of Jesus, there is always hope. Jesus confronts our hopelessness and fills us with hope. He fills us with the hope that the future holds a better tomorrow. He gives us hope that our past will not determine our eternity. When I say past, I'm not talking about that Jesus Christ crucified and risen again. I'm talking about our past mistakes and our past sins. That does not determine our eternity. Jesus determines our eternity. He gives us hope that the present we live in is redeemable. Do we believe that the present we live in is redeemable? I'll be honest, I struggle with it sometimes. I struggle with the fact that, man, is this ever going to end? But then I'm reminded that Jesus is coming back. And I'm reminded of that verse I just read in Revelation. "Behold, I am making all things new." See, Jesus gave Jairus hope that day. Hope that death does not have the final say. Only Jesus has the final say. That's why we don't fear death. It's not easy to go through. It's not easy to experience, especially those that we love go before us. We don't want that to happen. We hate it. There's still that sting of death. But we know that we will see them again one day. We do not fear. Because death doesn't have the final say. Jesus does. So in closing, Jesus confronts the fear of uncleanness. He reminds us that He met us in our uncleanness. Not where we should be, but where we were. And He saved us and changed us by the power of the cross and the empty tomb. And He confronts the fear of hopelessness. When this world just gets darker and darker and darker, know that Jesus' light is going to get brighter and brighter and brighter. Because guess what? Every day that passes, we're closer to being with Jesus. We're closer to the return of Jesus, or to when we see Jesus face to face because we've left this life behind. It's like walking in a very dark cave and trying to find your way out. And then we've heard the expression, there's light at the end of the tunnel. It starts off as a speck. And you see it off in the distance. But as you get closer, as you take one step closer to that light, what happens to that light? It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And in Revelation it says that we won't even need the sun anymore. And recently I saw that scientists were saying the sun has kind of gone into this hibernation period. It's not giving off as much heat and things like that. And they're kind of concerned about that. I was like, well, that's fine. I won't need that sun in eternity. Because the Son of God will be the light. Because Jesus will be the light. Because Jesus is brighter than the sun. Amen.